Dear friends, greetings to you. My name is Alexey Ognev, CEO of the DigiU ecosystem. Today we have another webinar. The topic of this webinar is the legal block of our company. At the beginning of the year, we announced that 2025 is the year of legal structuring for our group of companies, the fund, the technical laboratory. Everything we have created over these 5 years of fruitful work requires clear legal structuring. And in fact, we see this as an opportunity to reach the next level, because in the modern world, the legal significance of certain actions in the venture sphere, in the cryptocurrency sphere, is gaining more and more importance. If before we said that cryptocurrencies, blockchain, it was all a gray, unexplored area, now it's different. Since last year, we see that if, for example, a company is located somewhere in the United States of America, it has more opportunities if the company is properly structured. It has more opportunities. And all this increases the chances of becoming a unicorn, attracting the necessary amount of investment, including from the right people. So there are many nuances, and it became obvious to us last year that we would dedicate the next year to intensive legal work with a focus on many parameters. What concerns you among these parameters? It is the protection of investors, ease of use, ease of ownership, because everyone is used to things being done with the press of a button. In addressing these issues, we strive to maintain such an approach. Security and plans for further development. Obviously, we are currently developing as a private company with a closed list of shareholders. This is a standard classic approach for any business starting its journey. Ahead of us lies a certain crossroads, and we have talked about this crossroads many times, providing examples of the pros of choosing one path or another, as well as their cons, limitations, and so on. That is, the more complex the system, the more responsibly one must approach a particular choice. Accordingly, when resolving legal issues, we need to lay down possibilities for ourselves. Firstly, to develop as a private company with a closed list of shareholders and all the advantages of this decision. Secondly, we need to lay down the possibility of developing as a public company with an IPO, entering some public market with an open list of shareholders so that we are influenced by market volatility, markets, and so on. What else do we need to lay down? Obviously, as we develop in the field of artificial intelligence and blockchain, we are also looking towards tokenization. So there might be a third path of development, because what do we see? This is all developing very rapidly with someone tokenizing something. We ourselves understand this quite well and must consider this path as well. And accordingly, there are many other parameters which have been in place for about 1.5 years with regular legal meetings, calls, and so on, where we study jurisdictions. And last year we demonstrated a set of 5 jurisdictions that we are leaning towards, where we see our pros, cons, and so on. Now we are at the decision-making stage. During this webinar, I will try to share, including thoughts on this matter, and probably announce some almost final dates, because the longer we ponder, the less time we have left to resolve this issue this year. For example, following the reorganization itself, our processes for obtaining various cryptocurrency licenses, banking and financial licenses, and other necessary approvals. We have planned all this for this year. Therefore, to avoid stretching it out, obviously, we are accelerating our efforts and efficiently. What is best at accelerating anyone in making decisions about reorganization? It's a clear, understandable, and well-defined deadline, a date by which we must submit all documents, must decide on all necessary registries, lists of participants, and requirements. And we have, I remind you, more than 23,000 people. That's quite a lot. Not all jurisdictions support such a number of participants in one business structure. Therefore, certain specific nuances and challenges arose here as well. In fact, the work done by our legal team using various consultations and others is such a truly enormous and commendable effort, and I sincerely express my respect, probably admiration for the work done, part of which I will now begin to share. It is important to understand here that I will mention some things for better context understanding and insights, so that you, as always in our webinars, see the decision-making process, the choice process we make, and understand some motivation and long-term planning. That is, for example, I will list a lot of information. Today I have a large number of documents in front of me, and I will even read some things so that you also get this context. Actually, I recommend strongly that we commence with some general key events. This is so that both the new audience and existing one indeed have some common context. The DigiU ecosystem actually began in 2019, which is crucial, and probably by the end of 2020, we formed such a legal structure, registered companies in Cyprus, and began to attract funding for developments in fields like artificial intelligence technologies, specifically blockchain and related technologies, as well as finance, venture startups, in quite a fairly secure manner for our co-owners, certainly indeed. And throughout this entire path, we've traveled together, hand in hand. We've done so with an understanding of how important it truly was. The correct legal form matters significantly. Perhaps this relates back somehow, either due partly because my basic foundational education lies within law itself, or perhaps something else entirely different altogether. But regardless, it turns out this approach remains quite correct, indeed precise, too naturally speaking. In fact, during year 2022, political events intervened, affecting lives across very large numbers, globally limiting abilities among certain CIS countries, interacting freely alongside European counterparts, effectively causing operational limitations upon Cypriot-based firms under political sanctions, yet still preserving protected rights investors hold dear, etc., facing questions where next move, without experiencing restrictions, opening bank accounts, transferring specific rights. What happens if transferred, then used again? Many difficulties arise, accumulating vast amounts intellectual property, including copyrights, patents, code, research, assets, received, various snapshots, bonus programs. Given peculiarities, staying would question, right? Although, let's say in 2019 and 2020, it seemed like a very quiet, respectable haven where it was right to open and conduct business. Thank God, modern technologies are changing the world, changing it for the better, and towards the accessibility of everything that probably should be accessible. Blockchain makes everything transparent. Artificial intelligence makes everything fast and efficient. And in combination, our task is to find such a balance between the real world and its requirements, laws, and accordingly the digital world that we are creating together with you. So the choice of jurisdiction was a very important key issue. It arose from the impossibility of developing in the jurisdiction where we registered back in 2020 or 2021. At that time, we issued and obtained all sorts of specific numbers, ISIN and so on. This context is created for the new audience and for the current one, I remind you. Then it became clear to us that we need to change the jurisdiction to avoid further complications. And thank God that it happened that way, that the business we conduct from a technological point of view, from the point of view of venture financing, has proven to be successful. and we started to have serious products in the fund's portfolio. This includes AVA, RWA projects, and much more, which in itself also requires some management and proper legal packaging. So the number of co-owners increased, the number of countries increased, and essentially all of this needs to be managed for some time until, as I mentioned, a public, non-public, or other type of company. Accordingly, the issue became acute already, it turns out, last year in 2024. So what steps did we take? First, we conducted the burning of unclaimed shares. That is, we clearly understood for ourselves that 100 billion could be burned. We wouldn't need them. This is a large amount that we issued with a reserve and left ourselves such an opportunity for maneuver. This was an absolutely correct decision, the right approach. When we realized that we didn't need it, accordingly, we got rid of it. What did this lead to? To the fact that the share of co-ownership in the company by our crowd community, our community of investors, holders of the DigiU ecosystem shares, has now increased to almost 10%. That is, initially over 4 years we sold about 2%. Then through various additional accruals, if you've been with us for a long time, you remember both X11 and last July there was an additional accrual. So we increased the ownership share of the company, additionally credited you with unclaimed securities. And what do we see at the moment? This is available to any user in their personal account. There is a register of co-owners, and there are slightly more than 8 billion purchased shares now. They are in ownership, and some amount is in installments. We take as a basis that approximately 10% you own the DigiU ecosystem. Is this great? Of course it's great. But when we started this process in 2024, we obviously laid out greater ownership and announced it. And you all remember such schemes with percentages where the project team had 40%, there was a reserve fund of about 20%, and the ownership share of the crowd community was up to 40%. So these are approximate values that, in our well-considered opinion, enable us to accomplish a balance between preserving the rights and opportunities of early investors while also fulfilling their obligations, including but not limited to those mentioned, providing the company with an ability to develop correctly, to progress in moving towards becoming a public company if needed, or transitioning into a tokenized company, or another relevant and goal-aligned legal form as required. So, the reserve fund, which constitutes around 20%, was intended for various actions related specifically to developing this particular organization further, because as we know well enough now, world changes constantly, thus limiting oneself too much only leads inevitably toward more issues needing resolution later on down line whenever necessary. Therefore, always leaving such room maneuvering becomes essential indeed. Thank God, managing do effectively benefit overall growth last year, completed first stage reorganization, burning unclaimed shares, additionally crediting everyone, essentially taking extra time, studying different legal schemes, registering complex intellectual property, any other rights arising large numbers. And naturally, all of this must be combined with certain business operations and the number of company co-owners, which has been steadily increasing over the years, because it is absolutely crucial for us and for you, our valued partners, that your rights are protected and that we guarantee this with our reputation, which we have built over years of dedicated service and continue to finance developments, innovative ideas, groundbreaking products, and ambitious projects that arise in the ecosystem we have built together over 5 years. So, to summarize the key points, in the year 2024, the ownership share of the crowd community significantly increased to about 10%. Then a strategic buyback initiative was conducted. First of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to all those who had access to it. It was such an incredibly important event for the entire ecosystem. More than 14,000 security holders who are part of our community had the opportunity to participate in the buyback, to sell their portfolios if they chose to do so. And it is important to note here that this is almost 60% or 70% of the total. That is, the vast majority of the audience had this unique opportunity. We received about 1,300 applications from interested parties, and accordingly, only about 300 people, after careful consideration, confirmed these applications. For us, this is a clear and undeniable signal that, firstly, the absolute majority of the company's co-owners who joined us from 2019 to almost 2023 wholeheartedly approve of everything we are doing and do not intend to sell their security portfolios and are determined to move forward with us on this exciting journey. Secondly, from indeed an audience's perspective, this may indeed be an even more precise and clear affirmation and confirmation of your unwavering support. I am saying this wholeheartedly and sincerely and genuinely on behalf of our company, our dedicated team, as well as everyone involved in these efforts. I don't recall mentioning this before in detail, but it is a solid affirmation from almost 15,000 people that we are doing everything right, naturally continuing with great energy. Those who confirmed their application, these around about 300 individuals. There are no questions here either. You were offered terms thoughtfully considered. You made your choice accordingly. Our task now is to publish a detailed payment schedule come June, which will appear soon thereafter. And so, starting July, we will begin meticulous buyback calculations. Therefore, we are also freeing up some amount, about precisely 400 million of these securities, which our company is buying back strategically. All of this fits into what can best be described as a process, so to speak, of phased reorganization over time, and thusly, 2025 has arrived, one major goal being licenses, legal packaging, and other related matters. To avoid dragging out discussions unnecessarily, let's move forward towards specifics. Let's start first with jurisdiction considerations. Everything I'm about to say remains under careful consideration still. We continue receiving consultations actively, but obviously already leaning 90% towards specific jurisdictional decisions. What can announce now? That it's British Virgin Islands chosen wisely, perhaps explain points including why selected, advantageously seen largest venture fund BlackRock registered there during year 2023. We have repeatedly and consistently talked about it, referred to it, watched it closely and continuously, and followed it, because where this fund invests, what it supports, everyone wants to get some attention, investments, and so on from it. That is, it is in many ways a guarantee or at least a high probability of success if your startup received some investments from this fund or became part of it, and so on. Obviously, we are observing this. And in 2023, it registered the so-called BlackRock USD Institutional Digital Liquidity Fund, LTD, in this jurisdiction, in the BVI. Thus, it attracted significant and substantial attention to this jurisdiction and made it, in essence, respectable and noteworthy. That is, if such a major and prominent fund did this, many smaller and numerous funds also opened their offices there afterward. Seeing the accessibility of this environment, good and favorable conditions, and the ability to develop their business as required by business, experiencing minimal and negligible restrictions from the regulator. Here we are talking about the venture and thriving business of which we are a part. So, naturally and consequently, after such attention was attracted, the requirements there increased and substantially heightened. That is, if there is a very large fund in your jurisdiction, you need to comply. And therefore, the requirements for companies increased, and thus the respectability of this jurisdiction increased. So we are leaning towards and considering the BVI partly because there are large funds there. This is conditionally a mark of quality for a company that is in the same place as the others and not somewhere else. It's challenging to give an example right now, as I'm afraid of offending some legal territorial jurisdiction, but in some other less respectable jurisdictions. And here we are conducting this business with other similar companies registered here. It's a mark of quality. So, accordingly, this helps us in the following way. We also looked at this legal territorial jurisdiction from the perspective of whether we can develop there in such a way that we would later face fewer obstacles and fewer difficulties in order to launch either our company or some of the structures that we will have, for instance, to conduct an IPO. Everything fits well within these parameters regarding our plans. Good. And if perhaps we want to tokenize our company or any structure within it, can business operations be conducted there while focusing on real-world assets direction? It can indeed be done there too. Can maintaining such non-public status allow development as a private entity with closed shareholder lists and features like these? Yes, of course. Furthermore, can rights be granted effectively among co-owners? In general terms, yes, it is possible. Our chosen legal territorial jurisdiction allows all aforementioned actions due largely because its universal principles attractively exist throughout BVI's framework. Plus, seeing respectable neighbors choosing similarly adds confidence despite playing differently across venture businesses. What do current observations reveal then? This question holds importance since striving towards preparation begins documentarily. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there is a 90% probability. Therefore, the goal of this webinar is essentially to show you our movement in this direction and how you participate in this movement, how it affects you, and essentially what constitutes the decision-making process regarding the choice of jurisdiction, the proportion of share distribution, and how all of this fits into our strategy, how it fits into our crowdfunding model, how it fits into the venture fund model, and so on. Perhaps some of the terms mentioned are not always clear, therefore pause, study something about BVI, about BlackRock, about some unclear things I mentioned. So let's move on. The next important point that probably should be voiced at this meeting, so to speak, to continue solving the task that was set before the company. These are the very proportions that we actually plan to implement. That is, these are the proportions that provide you as co-owners of the company with a tangible increase in the share of its ownership. Because right now it's 10%, and this is what we plan to implement at the stage of crowd investing, crowdfunding, when we completed the sale of securities last year. This is the part that belongs to the team, which ensures, so to speak, the commitment to the chosen course. So, we are moving towards realizing our mission by creating a commercially successful enterprise with certain values, specific life orientations, and particular goals. To bring such a commercial component into this world, to become a unicorn company, and perhaps even more, and essentially to implement a new form of communication between artificial intelligence and humans and somehow contribute to the success and improvement of the quality of life on the entire planet through modern technologies that serve the benefit of any person in any country in the world. This is the value, the mission that we have been conveying for almost 6 years now, and which allows us to be understood by people in different countries. And essentially, we continue to implement this. But for this, it is necessary to have a certain controlling stake. This is a standard topic, which I think is clear to each of you. That is the proportions we now plan to maintain. 51%, a controlling stake that belongs to the team, to ensure that the structure is manageable and adheres to the chosen course, which is supported by the majority of our audience, and at the same time there is no opportunity to somehow seize control and so on, because the more we develop, the more attention we attract from both competitors and those who are interested in somehow joining us. But the point is not that I am now creating a mysterious image and boasting that Google or Elon Musk are interested in us and so on. No, I assume that at some point interest will arise and we need to be ready for this. So let's move on to the proportions. 51% is the controlling stake that ensures management, and in the new structure it belongs to the team. Previously it was 90%, now it is no less than 51%. The ownership share of our crowd community will be approximately up to 30%. We assume that this amount will be realized at its maximum possible. That is, your ownership share will significantly increase from 10% to 30%. And what about the remaining 19%? Obviously, as previously stated, as I mentioned, we adhere to a strategy, or rather an approach in a strategic manner, that we do not know everything. And this approach allows us to develop in a certain way. We do not know everything. Therefore, we must have the maneuverability, the ability to make maneuvers and so on. That very reserve fund of 19% we keep for ourselves, and in essence, in fact, plan to continue financing from this fund, continue to develop the crowd direction, and have the opportunity to attract some strategic partners at this particular stage who are available to us or who will potentially appear in the future, attracting from the reserve fund. What does this mean? It means that the share of the crowd community becomes inviolable and protected. At this stage of development, as you have previously mentioned, it ceases to be diluted or reduced, or the attraction of new financing is not carried out from your share. Accordingly and consequently, we maintain these proportions, and the process that we initiated, resumed in December of last year specifically, the process of attracting financing, our own unique developments, which now allow the company to develop effectively and efficiently. Soon you will learn some very interesting information and insights about the development of the product DigiU Alpha. It represents a combination of neural networks available to us from the open market, along with some of our internal developments. These are ultimately assembled into a separate personal assistant, helper, sometimes even acting as your psychologist or partner, some kind of entity that can be conveniently used on all platforms where you are accustomed to being present, not just any new gadget or something else entirely unknown, but an entity truly acting in your best interests in future scenarios, capable eventually of obtaining verification needed to perform significant actions within someone's life journey, and so forth. This year has greatly advanced us further in creating this innovative product, conceptually known as digital personality representation. Therefore, soon enough, we shall surprise everyone even more. Meanwhile, though, please do participate actively during big game events while testing these ongoing developmental processes happening right now inside our Telegram chats, which continuously improve over time through constant enhancements made regularly by ourselves too. Various exciting events occur frequently across Facebook, including demonstrations showcasing how content products like DigiU Alpha come alive, creatively speaking. Overall, generally speaking, this term itself will soon gain wider recognition shortly thereafter, henceforth surprising audiences everywhere. And this funding, which we opened in December, allowed us to accelerate significantly, but already to create everything on such a solid foundation, from the team, from the ecosystem, from understanding the business, the venture fund, to laboratories, trends, and so on. In general, this webinar is released on April 10th, but I already know that around April 18th, there will be very interesting news on a significant topic for all of us. Therefore, I am announcing this right away, drawing your attention. In May and June, even more interest in the company, the products, and our new interesting format of interaction with you is expected with the help of personal assistants and everything we are developing within the team. So the team holds a controlling stake of 51%, but 30% is the share of the crowd community and all those who became co-owners of the company. And accordingly, the reserve fund is about 19%, which we leave for financing and for some possible further redistribution, but already, for example, not towards the team, but towards the crowd community. That is, potentially your share may increase if we see that these securities, for example, will not be needed, not in demand, or will exhaust their significance, and so on. What else is important to note? Right now, we have approximately around 100 billion shares. Whether this number will decrease significantly, substantially, not much, or remain in this range is still under discussion. Naturally, we are calculating all possible outcomes, results, and modeling, simulating the pricing policy, pricing strategy, the process of evaluating, assessing the company. We still have to do all this in the upcoming months. Therefore, at this webinar, note that there is no exact position, definitive stance on this issue yet, but it is definitely not an increase in the number of shares. Additionally, I think careful and attentive listeners during my speech probably heard me mention several times that we continue funding. And at the same time, the share of the crowd community becomes untouchable, inviolable, and ceases to be uncertain, stops being uncertain, so to speak. The resumption of sales, if you're not from the venture sphere, was perceived, understood by you in different ways. I received a lot of responses and feedback that we are not acting in your interests, reducing your role and shares, and so on. There was enough of such feedback, and I try to closely monitor this closely in chats, discussion chats, and elsewhere. This is partly why we combine the resumption of sales with a buyback to give everyone who is dissatisfied with something the chance and opportunity to really exit the company. And I have already shared such a firm and confident decision of the community to stay. How do we execute and implement the protection, safeguard, and protection of our community that joined us up to a certain period of time? Is it important to do this? In any case, it is important. You provided us with great support by refusing the buyback, but I am not saying that without this support, we would not have done it. We would have done it anyway because we saw this opportunity. But now, seeing your dedication and commitment and support, your trust and faith in us, it is clear and obvious that we will implement this protection to the fullest, maximum extent. In any case, as a matter of fact, we are committed to this course of action. And how can this be implemented from a legal standpoint? In the jurisdiction we discussed, which is crucial for our operations. Obviously, these tools exist because we are not reinventing the wheel. Rather, we are enhancing it with advanced technology. Figuratively, we are teaching it to fly and move very quickly, efficiently, and effectively. but we are not inventing a means of transportation. Everything has already been invented for us by pioneers and innovators of the past. Our task is to be able to use it and do it skillfully with precision and expertise. That is, to ride this bicycle correctly with balance and control. So this whole legal story, which we have spent many hours understanding, allows a certain number of company shares or members of a particular society to be awarded special rights and become privileged investors with unique benefits and opportunities. What does this mean? I will now try to move directly to the documents, which are comprehensive and detailed, because I have a report from our legal department on my desk about what set of rights privileged investors of our company can have and why it is such. It makes sense to note the following thing now, as it is of utmost importance. All those who have been with us since 2019 until a certain date, which I will name a little later, have the opportunity to become privileged investors of the company with exclusive rights and privileges. That is, to receive certain rights, a degree of protection, a certain form of interaction with dividends, and so on. Modern legal practices and BVI allow this to be implemented with flexibility and adaptability. Let's see how this can be done and what rights can be in detail and with clarity. I will now list some basic, generally accepted ones, which are foundational and essential. But this does not mean they are exhaustive, because we can improve them based on certain decisions, that is, orient them towards our community with input and feedback from stakeholders. Right now, we have an introductory webinar where I will list the rights and comment on them, providing insights and explanations. And you can think in your head whether this would be interesting to you or not. Maybe you will share your conclusions on this matter in the comments under this webinar, fostering discussion and engagement. For example, privileged investors in BVI, and not only there, we are now talking about this jurisdiction in general, but it is not only accepted there, can have certain types of dividend rights. What does this mean? Options for dividend privileges, for instance, priority in dividend payments over common stockholders. This is probably interesting. For some, it is important. You might think to yourself, well, of course, I was here earlier, I should be paid first. And it's hard to disagree with that, because the resumption of sales can be perceived as the next stage of financing. And you have already passed your stage. Together, we have accumulated significant intellectual potential. The company's assets, AVA tokens, are of great importance, and the potential of these tokens will definitely manifest itself, and soon you will be happy with the news together with us. In general, some intellectual potential has been accumulated, which is already working and bringing profit. Do you want to openly share this potential with someone? I think not everyone wants to. Therefore, there are such dividend rights that ensure priority, and the next term is cumulative dividends. This is when dividends are not paid, they accumulate. That is, for example, in 2024, we, as committed company leaders, decided that everything we earn will be sent to the development of the company. Was it the right decision? Yes, 100% correct, because we are at such an early stage where it is better not to think about dividends. Let's direct everything towards development. This is my position. But not everyone can share it. Not everyone is in the context. Someone has to take responsibility. I am talking about myself now. This year there are also questions. When will there be dividends? We need to think about this more. Are there products in the company that generate profit? Definitely, indeed. The portfolio is growing and expanding. The more time passes, the more products there are, and the closer the investments made by the fund during its existence come to profitability and success. If we look now, we have added more products, and their number will continue to grow and expand. In general, it's wonderful and promising. But what about dividends? This has already been thought of for us, and there is a term called cumulative dividends, which is beneficial. This happens when a year is skipped, for example, 2024. But these dividends are carried over to the next year, meaning they are preserved and secured. Then for 2024, they can be received, and for 2025 and 2026 as well, if we decide to skip and defer. For example, we might work excellently for some more time, and in 2027 pay dividends for 3 years, which is advantageous. We can use this opportunity and prioritize paying dividends to those who are privileged investors, who are valued. There can also be various ties to the company's KPIs, achieving certain goals, and so on, which is strategic. So dividends are a pressing relevant topic that exists in chats and discussions. Here's an example of how we can implement this effectively. Moreover, there are also liquidation preferences which are protective. This is towards protection and security. It happens in practice that not everything is going well for a company, unfortunately. We are not talking about us now, but in general and broadly. We all remember the bankruptcy stories of companies like Nokia, Kodak, Yahoo, which are cautionary tales. These are empires, great companies, market leaders, leaders in their segment, with large profits, historically. But they took a step in the wrong direction, and now they are gone, unfortunately. How to avoid this? There are various liquidation preferences where priority in the distribution of intellectual rights and accumulated assets is given to privileged people and stakeholders. Is this fair to those who refused a buyback, who have supported the company since 2019, write good comments, talk about us, share products? Of course it's fair, whether we want it or not, and justifiable. The next type of rights we will discuss today are indeed certainly conversion rights. This is when preferred stockholder rights can be converted into common ones upon a particular request or vice versa. Are these particular types of rights necessary? It's quite hard to say definitively right now without further background and context analysis. You probably don't have an obvious demand for this at present moment in time. When might this actually be needed? Perhaps during preparations for an initial public offering, IPO, we might want to issue common shares instead of preferred ones under certain circumstances. You might then want the option available to convert them accordingly if such opportunities arise. There are also various kinds of buyback-related shareholders' rights involved here too. Something we've kind of already implemented within our framework, but it can still somehow additionally secured in this area through other means if required later on down the line. So now we're talking about a general approach, just giving you some broader background context overall. If you are watching this webinar session currently happening live online right now, you probably do indeed have some sort of demand regarding these topics being discussed today. If I don't tell you all about everything related directly here though, you're unlikely going out searching around internet yourself, studying up more deeply, etc. so forth. It's better therefore I inform properly while thinking along together, staying fully engaged, able to perceive next information conveyed accurately interested parties alike. There exist numerous protective shareholders, voting rights, where participation decisions protecting interests possible, for instance from issuance new additional company shares, potentially diluting value existing holdings. I know there are moments various splits occur, but least possessing number votes allows prohibiting actions deemed unfavorable, creating specific debt load scenarios, e.g. privileged status, decided large loan taken, expressing opinions, forms at many different approaches. The next right is the right to vote. In classical terms, common stock and preferred stock. Common stocks have voting rights, while preferred stocks do not. But this does not mean they cannot be endowed with them. Therefore, in BVI, this is available. And shares can be very privileged. Also, there are some special issues on which you want to vote. This is an important point. So what does this mean? If we endow with a large number of rights, can this, for example, slow down our work? Of course it can. Do you keep track of all the events in the company? Probably not always. Maybe 10% of people actively watch everything in chats, read emails. I am speaking statistically as we study these moments. And if we need to make some decision collectively, how many months will it take to gather these votes from you? I mean, on some issues, we can give a minimal number of you the right to vote. Is this correct? Probably from the point of view of the principle of collectivism, the principle of collective decision making, it is correct, but not at the expense of speed. Because in the modern world, if you are slow, you can say you do not exist. Therefore, we will also consider this topic because some issues can be sensitive. I am, in fact, forming an understanding. There is also the right to participate in subsequent investment rounds, such as those that occur after the initial offering. What does this mean? It is the beneficial and advantageous right of preferred shareholders to purchase new shares and products, namely those that are newly issued. That is, we first offer to those with privileges, and then if they all decline or do not reply within a certain period, we offer to everyone else. This can be quite interesting, as it provides an opportunity for early investment. We already follow this principle. Everything in the personal account you first receive on the best terms, which means you get the most favorable conditions. There are also various informational rights where the share is exactly determined, a certain type of information is provided, and so on. It is important to understand that I have listed a typical set of rights for a preferred investor, and obviously it differs from the rights of a regular investor, at least in terms of dividend rights, protection, constitutional rights, priority access to new products or new shares that arise within the company. Can this happen? Of course it can. Will it happen? We are not sure yet. We do not know. And how can we know the future? We only carefully estimate the likelihood of certain events happening. Speaking of our company's level of development and the level of involvement of our community, obviously priority is given to dividend rights. I think we will outline this at a basic level, that preferred investors receive everything first, own all our developments, and therefore we distribute everything to them first. We may decide on the cumulative principle of these dividends. As I told you, if they were not paid this year, they are not lost, but carried over to later. This is good. So I think the basic is the liquidation priority on dividends, and we will consider and study everything else. How to choose a set of rights in various scenarios. It depends on the specific task at hand. If you just need to protect rights, that's one format. If you need to prepare for an IPO, then you need to consider an entirely different approach. If you need to obtain or provide some control, give it to someone, then that's a third set of functionality. Accordingly, we are in this particular context and make our decisions approximately in this manner. Dividend rights, priority in buyback, reverse buyback. This is all that we already implement. Accordingly, we need to 100% take this into account, make your 30% share privileged, essentially ensure the protection, ownership of the company created together with you and the assets that have been accumulated, all in such a priority format. Probably today is such an anticipated webinar, right? But it is obviously an introductory session on this particular topic, although the topic does not seem complicated to me. I think I explained, told, and described in a clear and concise manner how the decision was made, how we came to it, why we chose one thing or another, and most importantly, how we delineate and precisely determine the share. For example, when financing the next products, the next stage of the company's development, the DigiU alpha stage, we allocate an exact share due to the fact that shares purchased before a certain period become privileged. Investors become privileged in the understanding of this word. As I described now, when listing a certain set of rights that these privileged investors can possess. I mentioned shares purchased before a certain date. The question arises, how are we going to do all this? And until what date? The answer here is also quite simple. Firstly, how will we increase your ownership share in the company? I'll give you 3 seconds to think about it. Everyone who has been with us since at least last year knows how we do this. So 1, 2, 3. We do it in the standard way, by additional allocation of shares. We had X11. There was a completion period when we had the main snapshots. That is a familiar, understandable principle for you is implemented here. Accordingly, there will be several snapshots until July 1st. They will be on May 1st, June 1st, and July 1st. And within these actions, we will record the number of securities on your balances and allocate additional ones in accordance with your activity. Obviously, we will have a group of people who will receive shares by default. These are all those who participated with us from 2019 until December 10, 2024. When we resume sales, you receive by default because you were with us before the resumption. Then there is a group of those who joined after the resumption, and there will be several groups that will join us in April, May, June, and so on. So you now see the details on your screens, and naturally after this webinar there will be a post with an explanation. But for those who have been with us for a long time, this is a familiar mechanism. What does it imply? Pay your installment. If you have already paid everything and want to increase your share in preferred shares and become a privileged co-owner with a significant number of securities, then take a new installment and increase your share. Especially now, there are various programs where you can get an additional bonus. If you have already bought everything you wanted and have substantial and diverse investment portfolios, you can do nothing. Those who are joining now, since the start of sales in the market, you still have half of April, May, and June to make a decision and carefully increase your portfolio. The only important nuance or detail. I consider it as precise, fair, and correct as possible, as I have previously stated. If you want to be privileged and distinguished investors with preferred shares and benefits with the rights I mentioned, then you need to ensure that your installments are paid off by that time as per the guidelines and conditions. Because if by July 1st we close the acceptance of privileged and exclusive investors and you have an active installment, then all subsequent payments will be for standard ordinary shares in the market. There's nothing wrong with that either. You can also own ordinary shares in the market, receive financial dividends and returns on them, but after the preferred ones. This is fair as a result, and naturally this applies to installment plans. Because an installment is not a standard approach, it's a crowdfunding approach in the financial market, where you have the opportunity to pay over a number of months and opportunities. Yes, it's extremely convenient for you, for both parties involved, and beneficial, but is it convenient for the company? And is it generally accepted anywhere in the world to acquire company shares like this, when the company is developing and expanding, and you bought a long time ago, and are paying in a calm and composed manner over time and consistently? Everything has already increased in value several times over, and you're acquiring at the same rate and conditions. Therefore, everything is equitable and fair here in the market, and just all installments you take, and if you want them to be privileged and exclusive, please pay them off by July 1st. Otherwise, after July 1st, they will be ordinary in the market and conditions. They will simply have significantly fewer rights and privileges and opportunities. But naturally, ownership rights and participation in some special programs will remain in the market and benefits. These are basic foundational shares in the market and conditions. So, the standard and well-established mechanism of 3 snapshots in the market and procedures. You see some specific details and information on the screen and information. In general, I have told you all the information I wanted to share. I am very happy. Congratulations to everyone, because we have reached the completion of the reorganization. There are still questions about the numbers, about the number of shares. Again, this will depend on how much we sell, how much we additionally allocate, so we will look at this later. Accordingly, on July 1st, we complete the acceptance of privileged investors, and then, as usual, within 2 weeks, we will have calculations. We need this to form the final register. During April, May, and June, we will have some legal inclusions and legal posts where we will publish information, and something related to this topic will appear in the personal account. This topic is basic and important. We held this webinar. Maybe in May or June, we will hold another webinar where we will explain everything, say that we have definitely chosen BVI, for example. We will say the number of shares. We will talk about submitting documents, on what date we fix the register. Also about the fact that until this moment, everything for preferred shares has been credited, and after this time, everything that relates to ordinary shares. We will talk about the structure, what proportions, where the reserve fund is. Essentially, this is the whole approach. And from July, either the registration will begin, meaning we will not delay with this, or it will start on some foreseeable dates, but this year it will definitely start and finish. We will also try to obtain some licenses, but this is for banking activities, for cryptocurrency licenses. This is the next stage, and right now we are still far from them. We are following the path we have taken, studying, getting consultations, observing. We act in the interests of the company, in the interests of the co-owners of the company, and in the interests of each individual person for whom we create products. So, thank you for today's meeting. If questions arise, ask them in the chats, share your impressions about the approach, about some interesting moments, and we will share and write to you. I conducted this meeting for you with great pleasure. I wish you all the best.